I'm Catherine Souch from the Royal Geographical Society with IBG, the RGS, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this first webinar for geography students on the many career opportunities opened up by studying geography. The first event's on risk management and insurance, and I'm delighted to be joined by three experts in the field: Tina Thompson, William Ford, Richard Tew. You're going to be hearing a little bit more about each of them in just a minute. But I also want to draw attention to the fact that they're some of the founding members of the Society's newest professional practice group on risk management and disaster reduction. Over the next 45 minutes or so, you're going to hear from the three of them about why they've pursued their career. They're going to offer you some advice and guidance. They're going to hopefully showcase some of the really exciting things going on in the sector. We're strongly encouraging you to ask questions, so please do post them into the chat. I think we're using Slido. Alex, who's supporting this, Alex Jacksman, will be overseeing and feeding us those questions, and we hope to be able to respond to them during this webinar. But if we don't, what we'll do is we'll pick up some of those questions and we'll post some answers afterwards and share some of the resources. So after the event, you can expect to get an email from us with links to some of the resources we talk about. We're hoping to be able to post the video of this webinar so you can watch it again. And there'll also be emails to get back in touch and to keep in touch with us. Okay. So to start, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite each of the expert panelists in turn to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their background, their career to date, and their role now. So Tina, can I turn to you first, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine, and really delighted to have that opportunity to speak to you all today virtually, as we are in this unfortunate situation with the pandemic. But I think very exciting, and almost envy you the position you're in, thinking ahead of what choices will you make, what career direction you will go in. So delighted to have the opportunity to speak a little bit about my experiences, my journey, and where we find ourselves today. So to introduce myself, to start off with, I guess my journey actually started quite a long time ago, because I'm from Germany originally. So I moved to the UK, I think it's about nearly 19 years ago, to start with my undergraduate studies, which was GIS and remote sensing at Bar University. So you can see I also made the choice of studying something geography related. And that was an absolutely exciting time. I've really enjoyed it back then, and especially with the whole Earth observation and satellite imagery and learning about all of those things was definitely the right choice for me. Having done the undergraduate degree, for me, was always, I knew that I wanted to carry on with my studies, maybe in part because in Germany, when you do a degree, generally back then, you didn't have that differentiation between undergraduate, masters. It just would have been one long degree, basically, until you got your diploma. So I felt that I wanted to carry on. And I remember I actually interviewed for master studies. And I was very lucky that one of the professors who interviewed me actually saw great potential in me and urged me to actually apply straight away for a PhD rather than a master's. So I followed his advice and applied for some open funded PhD that was all at UCL at that time. And I got the PhD, and I was absolutely delighted to actually land, in a way, a job with that, because with a funded PhD, you get paid a salary. Obviously, you've got that time schedule of having to finish your PhD in 3.5 years, but that made a big difference from, as you know, the amount of money you have to spend to fund your studies. So I ended up doing a PhD in geometric engineering at UCL, and I was lucky enough to be funded by Ordnance Survey, as you know, the National Mapping Agency of Great Britain. And the great thing about those sort of joint industrial academic partnerships is that you straight away get that experience, because I spent some time at Ordnance Survey finishing my PhD, and I was working with OS Master Map and looking at ways to infer implicit knowledge from map data. From that, I almost got poached straight away then from my PhD into the industry with catastrophe modeling firms. So those are companies who develop models to quantify the risk for insurance/reinsurance. Catastrophe modeling specifically relates more to natural perils, if you think about windstorms, earthquakes, floods, and that kind of thing. So of course, they were looking for talents, for university graduates with geography background, as in my case, to help with the development of the models and looking at the exposures. And we'll talk more about this throughout this session. But anyway, that's how I ended up starting by accident, you can say, in sort of the risk management sphere, starting off in a more technical role in model development. And from that, obviously, I wanted to expand my horizon, as you'll find yourself as you go through this journey. You want to always challenge yourself and do more interesting, exciting things. And so I made the decision to move onto the client side. So I moved to actually an insurance, reinsurance company in the city of London, where these models were applied. So really seeing the application side of things, working, with clients and working in quantifying that risk for the company. The last bit of my journey, I then moved on to a broking firm in reinsurance. So again, slightly different perspective, from having developed the models, then applying them within an insurance company, to then working at a broker that basically places insurance between an insurance company and a reinsurance company. So we'll talk more about that through this session, but I can just tell you before I finish, it's been definitely the best move. You may think insurance sounds boring when you think about your own policies, but actually it can be a really exciting area from a risk management point of view. Anyway, back to you, Catherine.
Thank you. That's wonderful. William, I'm going to turn to you now in terms of telling us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, thanks. It's a slightly more meandering journey than Tina's, I think. And Tina's last comment, I think, is important, that when people say what you want to be when you grow up, most people don't stick their hand up and say, I want to be an insurer. Most people kind of find their way into this world and actually find it's a lot more interesting than maybe they expected it to be. So anyway, my journey started rather before Tina's as well, I think. I graduated from UCL, again, in anthropology and geography. I did a joint degree, which was really, really interesting. And I kind of had a bit of time out doing some anthropology related stuff after that, but went back to the master's degree, which was at UCL and Imperial College at that time, in remote sensing. Looking at pretty early on, really, in the days of Earth observation, but looking at high resolution images, MODIS and HIRIS, and then I was really looking at how you could infer the best data from those images. But during both those periods, I was doing lots of work with GIS, and that was really what captured my imagination, I think. So after I finished my master's, I actually joined Arthur Andersen, working in their upstream oil and gas division, managing products for geospatial analysis of assets in the upstream exploration industry. And I did that for 9 years, and it was really great. But after 9 years, I kind of thought I wanted a bit of a change, and I really wanted to see how geospatial analytics and geography was applied across different industries. So I joined Esri UK, and I worked in their consulting division for a number of years, and I ran the consulting team for commercial markets, which included insurance. It included a lot of other things, but that's how I first kind of came across insurance. And we did a project for Royal Sun Alliance, which is a big project for them and for us, on understanding where their risks were distributed around the world and making sure that there weren't concentrations of risks in areas which might have a high peril associated with them. So that kind of piqued my interest in insurance, and I too ended up going to a catastrophe risk modeling company, and I moved away from the kind of the direct kind of side, I guess. I moved more to an account management role, and I ran the account management team for that company for a while. And that was good because that let me sort of sit on the same side of the table as the client and talk to them about how they solve problems, which included geospatial challenges that they were having. I now work for a different catastrophe risk management company, kind of on the strategy side as well. So that's really how I've ended up where I am.
Fascinating, thank you. Richard, I think you're going to bring us a slightly different perspective again. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Hello, everybody. Right, so my career goes even further back than a long way further back. I think it And meandering is certainly one of the words for it. I think it certainly illustrates the very broad scope of geography. I started off my studies at university in the early 1980s. So I guess historical geography comes into that. And I did the BSc in geography with geology. So I did a joint honours degree at Nottingham. And then moved on straight from that to do PhD research at Stirling University, where I was lucky to get a funded PhD, partly funded by a mining company, and then through the Natural Environment Research Council. And that was looking at tropical geomorphology and exploration for diamond deposits in West Africa. So it was both applied, but also quite theoretical. It involved a lot of field work out in West Africa. And I followed on from that by working for many years then, or a few years, out in Africa and other tropical countries in Southeast Asia and in the Americas. And then by the 1990s, I was moving back to the UK and started a career in universities as a lecturer and researcher. That's also the time when I got involved really with the Royal Geographical Society, because in the late 80s, early 1990s, remote sensing was really just starting off through satellite remote sensing, and GIS was just starting off. So we started running a number of training sessions at the RGS with fieldwork in Hyde Park on how to use satellite remote sensing and how to use GPS and how to use GIS for mapping for fieldwork. So also did a few expeditions to overseas countries, low-income developing countries, Zambia, Guyana, getting very involved with that side, and the Explore weekends that the Royal Geographical Society run. So that took up a lot of the time then through the 1990s. I have since moved on. I'm at Stirling, and I'm now a professor in geoinformatics and disaster risk reduction at Portsmouth University. And in that, I then taken some of the things that we did when we were looking, first of all, at mapping resources, often mineral resources or water resources, but very often we're also asked to consider, well, what are the hazards in this area? Where's the flood hazard? Can we build a road into this area? What's the trafficability? What's the terrain like? And we were then using things like digital elevation models, and we'd use satellite imagery, looking to use freely available satellite imagery as much as possible to assess some of the hazardous features in those areas. And I think in more recent years, I've begun to realize the benefit of the human geography I did in my first degree, because the key thing to all of this is not just mapping the hazard, but also where are the people? Where are the vulnerable features that we affected? Where is there therefore most of the risk? So all aspects of geography have played a part in my career, I think. I've since gone on to run some master's courses in crisis and disaster management, and I'm doing a lot of work these days now in multidisciplinary teams, mostly involving postgraduate research students or postdoctoral researchers, sometimes involving master's students to do with remote sensing using drones or satellites, or geospatial analysis using geographical information systems. And some of that work more recently has turned around towards the insurance side of things, but we'll probably talk a bit more about that later on.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Richard. That's wonderful. A real wealth of experience, quite different pathways, some commonalities there, but interesting perspectives. Some of the questions that are already popping up in the chat, and I think questions that a lot of people who are attending this event are interested in, how do you get started in this particular sector? You know, how important is it to do some sort of form of training? All of you have done PhDs, but how important is it to do a master's for the training? How do you get into this sector? And maybe related to that, and we know it's a really dynamic, it's a really fast moving sector, what are some of the kind of really exciting, interesting opportunities that are starting to emerge? Not sure which order you want to take that in. Tina, can I come back to you first, and then maybe William again and Richard, but feel free to jump in a different sequence. So how do you get in? What's the role of further study, and what's exciting, what's new, what's happening in the sector right now?
Yeah, sure. Happy to kickstart us on this area. Obviously, a lot of things there you've mentioned. Perhaps first on how you get into this area, I did want to mention also that actually the learned societies are really helpful with this. And I don't want to come down here with a sales pitch for the IGS, but I've been involved with a number of societies actually also for a very long time, starting out as a student representative, being part of the student bodies they have, which allows you to network and learn about the different sectors. And yes, things like this event, I mean, it just opens the doors for you to ask questions and find out more. The other thing I would encourage as well is always the attendance of conferences. Look at the sector you're interested in particular, and there are plenty of sometimes free events. Sometimes, yes, they cost a little bit, but there can be local ones in London where you can gain great insights, not just from the speakers and presenters, but also from the people attending and finding out. For instance, Oasis initiative is something that's promoting a lot of sort of open framework for catastrophe modeling, holding events and promoting sort of a community in this area. So I would highly recommend that. In terms of sort of emerging areas, what's exciting, interesting, so perhaps speaking more from my insurance, reinsurance experience, and as we mentioned already, catastrophe modeling, which is actually the one thing I find hugely exciting because it's so cross-disciplinary. Obviously, geography plays a hugely important role, as both William and Richard have said, in terms of identifying where risks are located and quantifying those. But if you think about the catastrophes, that links in with earthquake science, seismologists, hydrology, if you're looking at flooding, meteorologists, if you think about windstorms, hurricanes, climate change, all of these big topics. And I found that hugely exciting to have had the opportunity to work with experts across these fields in this industry. And also this gives you opportunity in terms of where you start. You can obviously pursue a more academic route, pursuing a PhD if that's what interests you, and you can then move into industry, and you can also become then more of a expert in that field. As I said, we have hydrologists developing flood models, for instance. But that's not the only route. You can also, if you feel you're not that academic and you rather want to get straight into the business and get that experience, you can also look straight away at getting a graduate job. And many companies offer graduate schemes as well. And that's a fantastic route in straight out of your undergraduate degree. To get that experience, and often companies then provide you with a training scheme as well as part of that graduate program, where you get exposure across a business. So you also get then the opportunity to identify which areas in the business you would be interested in. Other things, maybe just briefly to add as well, what's especially relevant from a geography point of view for insurance, reinsurance is event response as well. As you know, when you hear in the news, hurricane striking or recent earthquake, Turkey region, obviously for insurance companies, and straight away there's a need to assess and quantify the potential impacts, not just to identify how much money they have to put aside to pay for the claims, which is called reserves, but of course also to respond quickly to their policyholders, sending loss adjusters and all of that technical stuff. But event response does rely a lot on geographical knowledge, especially Earth observation can play a crucial role here, as I'm sure Richard can tell you even more about it. But as you can imagine, these events happen in very remote regions at times, and it can be really beneficial to have, to look through the lens of the eye of the sensors that we have orbiting our world, to help get us a quick view of the extent of the damage where it is possible. I mean, of course, that comes with limitations, cloud cover, what type of sensor, and so forth. But you get an idea of the real application of the technology, of the data, and also the geographical skills. As William was saying, obviously, as part of your geography studies, you learn a lot about spatial analysis, mapping as well. Part of communication, absolutely crucial. To convey that to different stakeholders. So I think overall, I think my last point here is that also just the transferable skills that you learn doing geography more broadly speaking are absolutely really relevant across the sector. I mean, if I look at myself now, I mean, I'm more in a managerial role, so I don't really don't do hands-on sort of spatial analysis anymore these days. But, you know, from project management, communication, leadership, you know, spatial awareness, and the numerical and you know, the skills you gain, they're really important across all of these sectors and areas.
Thank you, incredibly helpful. William, do you want to come in on a few additional points?
Yeah, thanks very much. I totally echo what Tina says around, you know, she mentioned their physical geography and the application of kind of earth science and the kind of physical geography boundary on our industry for building, say, catastrophe models and that sort of thing is absolutely key. And I think my gut feeling is that if you want to pursue that kind of avenue, probably a PhD is the right thing for you to do in order to do that and to get in there. But I am essentially a human geographer, so I'm going to steer away from that, and I'm going to focus more on thinking about going back about 2 or 3 years now. I think the sexiest job title of the year was given to data scientist. And I think we've seen an explosion in data scientists who are dealing with huge data sets in insurance companies. If you imagine a primary insurer, which are the ones that we deal with, are dealing with, you know, policies for everybody in the UK and every house in the UK, it's a huge amount of data to manage. And they have, you know, there are big teams of data scientists in the insurance companies who are dealing with that, but I don't believe that geography is really as adequately represented in that those teams as it could be. I think it plays a huge part, and it's often there kind of the unspoken geography, and we need to kind of like promote it more, which is part of the reason, I guess, why we're doing this today. So I think, you know, geographic analysis, spatial analytics, they're all really becoming important, and they're finding their way into the mainstream data analytic tools. So that's really good, but that's a good area to explore. And hand in hand with that are technologies, another thing that's close to my heart. So the insurtechs. So these are technology companies who are disrupting or bringing a different perspective or making things completely different in insurance. So if you have a technological bent and you're maybe more around GIS and programming and that sort of thing, that might be a really good area to explore, to find where you can either start your own. There's plenty of resources for that to help you out there, networking and so on and so forth, or to join a startup. Be exciting times to do that. So that would be a good area to explore. However, the other thing I wouldn't, you know, we're talking about disaster risk management and insurance, and I would say that there's also avenues around humanitarian response and charities. So there are many different charities or kind of more public organisations. I'm thinking kind of around sort of there's the on-the-ground charities, but there's also kind of organisations like the World Bank or the UN, you know, who have these huge disaster risk management programs for dealing with the kind of humanitarian fallout of the whole thing and for mitigating and planning those things. So there's a huge role for geography to play there. And there are plenty of opportunities there as well, which would bring a different perspective. And maybe if you're less interested in the kind of the commercial aspect of it, and you're more interested in the humanitarian aspect, that would be really, really good. In terms of actually getting into the industry, and it falls more into kind of general careers advice, I guess, but now, without wishing to sound too old, there are so many ways to interact with people, partly, you know, accelerated by the COVID-19 situation. Everyone's more used to dealing with things virtually and kind of more one-to-one. But there's also, you know, networking groups. I mean, there's the learned societies, as Tina's pointed out. There's the conferences, and there's things like LinkedIn, which you can, you know, just use away, just go for it. So I think getting involved conferences, events, LinkedIn, other networking sites is really a great way to get your profile in there and show that you're interested. That's really what I'll throw in there.
Thank you very much. Richard.
Yeah, I think thinking about the careers paths of some of the students that I've seen over the years, then heading towards the insurance sector, some of them, a few of them, have headed that way from undergraduate degrees, geography and the like, environmental science, some of the geoscience, applied geology type courses as well. Probably that's a few. It depends really on getting a company that's offering work experience. And if you can get work experience, actually, even if you're doing that on a voluntary basis, it's worth getting the experience and seeing what's involved with that work. Hopefully doing a good job and getting a good report, because you could ask for those people for a reference in due course. So that does happen, but mostly I find students tend to decide they want to specialize on a certain area and go on to master's level, sometimes onto PhD, but generally onto master's level for a year or so. And often that would be relevant topics would be in geographic information systems, in geohazard assessment, in disaster management, and in risk management. So those tend to be the sort of master's areas where you're learning the extra skills beyond your first geography-based degree, where you can then start to focus on applications in the risk management and the insurance sector. Quite often as well with the students we've had that I've seen in recent years, they have gone into that catastrophe modelling side of things. Some have gone straight into insurance companies purely from the point of view of sorting out straightforward policies and things like that, but a lot are going towards catastrophe modelling. There is the PhD research and postdoctoral research side of things in universities. There's a lot of joint work often done between universities and businesses. That's very much being encouraged these days. At the moment, I'm working on one project. I guess it's the first real project that's been specifically on insurance. And if I look at the team I've got for that, the project is examining small farm businesses in Colombia and seeing if we can then develop insurance for those small farmers. Normally they can't afford to get insurance. They're not really big companies. So it's a very big market, as probably Tina and will appreciate. So there's a lot of interest in that. And we can use satellite remote sensing and freely available map layers for terrain and things like that to assess those areas and guide the insurance company in how to best assess the levels of risk and set the premiums for those companies, and also then how to assess whether there's been an extreme weather event or an earthquake or some such, which has then damaged the farms. And on that team, I've got 8 people. 4 of them have got geography backgrounds. 2 of them are data scientists with backgrounds in physics and computational sciences. They deal with big data. 2 of them are insurance specialists and dealing more with actuarial science, which was a new term for me until this project. So there's a lot of geography in there in that project. And it helps as well that it's not just the physical geography, it is also understanding aspects of the human and economic geography. I have to get very familiar with the growth stages of crops like cocoa and avocado in recent months, for instance. So that's an indication of the sort of variety that you can get there.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, the 3 of you, for different perspectives. Now, maybe just picking up a couple of questions and themes that are coming through the chat. Obviously, there's primarily an undergraduate audience who are joining us today, but there's obviously a few postgraduates as well. And we're living in extraordinary times at the moment. And I know one of the things that undergraduates are finding particularly challenging is work experience, placements and things like that. Do you have any advice in that particular regard at the moment for current geography undergraduates in terms of securing work experience?
I'm happy to kickstart on this one.
Please.
I was just going to say, from the experience of company I work with, I think we've been fortunate that we still offered internships this year, and they were fully run virtually. So I'd hope to think that there are still more companies out there, especially in the insurance, reinsurance sector, because we operate very well digitally. It wasn't very difficult to switch to the whole, remote working during this time, that they would still offer internships at this time, and especially looking at next year, hopefully with, COVID situation improving and vaccines and things like that, hopefully things will start going back more to normal next year. So hopefully there should be plenty of opportunities out there. But having said that, the demands can be very high and in terms of the applications for these internships. So again, I think it helps if you can show your proactiveness, that, whether you list some conferences you've been to relevant for the sector, if you've done your research, you know what it's about, what the role is about, so that when you do come to an interview, you can speak knowledgeably about it. I think those would be the key differentiators for you getting the foot in the door, because otherwise you're just one amongst the many. Perhaps one thing I can say as well, in terms of books and materials that are out there, I saw there was one question on that. There is actually tons of materials out there if you do a bit of research, from obviously academic papers, specific journals, but also books that are summarizing more about the risk management community and what we do in catastrophe modeling. So I'll urge you to have a look. There is lots of material out there if you want to find out more.
Thanks, Tina. That's really helpful. And also, just to the audience, that's sort of some of the things we're hoping to collate together a little bit afterwards and put on some resource pages we'll have on the Society website. William, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I echo what Tina says. I think for me, we don't actually run, we're quite small in our group in London, so we don't run an internship program, much as I'd love to. But I think in these times, we're kind of all in the same boat to some degree in terms of the experience of COVID, and we're all managing through it. So I don't think it should necessarily be a barrier. And I think in the early stages of your career, kind of attitude matters as much as aptitude. So going to those conferences, doing some reading, showing you've thought about it, showing you've got some commitment to pursuing a career in this area is really important. It will make you stand out, and it might feel a bit cheesy at the time, but believe me, it really does work, and it's key to moving on.
Thank you. Richard, are there things that you might reflect on in terms of seeing what you've seen students do as part of their degrees? Dissertation topics, particular module choices? There's a few questions in the chat about the importance of studying GIS and things like that. Is there anything there that you want to reflect on?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about GIS. If you can manage spreadsheets and things like that, then you're probably going to manage GIS. It's computer-based mapping. Remote sensing, yeah, okay, that is a bit of a specialist area. It's a bit of a golden age for data from remote sensing. We're getting it more and more frequently. We're getting some satellites that are live streaming what's happening down on the Earth. We're getting others that certainly deliver an image every day of what's down on the ground. And we're getting into more and more detail, down to say 25 centimeters detail from space, from 800 kilometers up or 600 kilometers up. And we can also go back 20 or 30 years and look at how things have changed over time. The data, a lot of that data is freely available as well. You don't have to pay for it. Companies don't have to pay for it. And also the software, you don't have to always pay for the software. There's a bit of software called QGIS, which is free and open source software. You can just download that. There's plenty of online training materials that you can use with it. So there's plenty of ways of easily getting a GIS and learning how to use it. It isn't just remote sensing data as well. That big data we've got at the moment, a lot of that is social media data, Twitter and all the other aspects of social media, which can be then analyzed to track what people are doing, why they're doing things. A number of scientists have been using that to say during COVID to track where people are. Well, we've got the track and trace type apps that were developed, but that's just an aspect then of applied geography, mapping where people are, aspects of epidemiology. Well, once you start mapping that, you're into the realm of geography. So analyzing social media data is a key part of that these days. and looking for trends and then tracking where people are, or in a disaster, seeing where people are and where you then need to focus your resources for rapid rescue or concentrate the relief efforts and the distribution of supplies. There are some NGO type organizations that you could get involved with on the humanitarian side. There's the likes of Map Action, if you're particularly into GIS mapping. They do very rapid response to disasters and are often amongst the first organizations on the ground to guide the search and rescue teams. There's also Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, and other NGOs such as Servon, possibly even the Red Cross, who can get a foothold in the door of this on the humanitarian side. We had a master's student a few years ago who went to Sierra Leone for a 1-month placement in, I think, 2014. And he was there for 1 year because that was the outbreak of Ebola in Sierra Leone. And because he'd had a bit of training on GIS with us, he ended up being the national expert for the Red Cross in Sierra Leone on GIS mapping of the epidemic and how it spread from province to province within the country. And then he was employed after that by the Red Cross centrally in Geneva as a consultant. In Geneva as well, you've got UNITAR and UNOSAT, United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and they will sometimes take on interns as well to help them with their mapping in preparedness for disasters or in rapid response to disasters. So that there are a lot of potential, well, there are some potential sources out there where you can get involved, even if you don't necessarily directly get involved with companies, or you're not too bothered about the insurance side, but are more interested in the humanitarian side.
Thank you. And just for the benefit of those who are attending, we are going to have a session early in the new year about careers in the third sector and careers in the humanitarian sector as well. So that might give a slightly different perspective on that. So going back to the commercial world, obviously there's lots of different opportunities here and different pathways. Is there sort of a starting job? Is there a starting role that a lot of people kind of, it's the first job they get when they enter the industry? Are there certain types of roles that people should be looking for and applying for, or is it much more fluid than that?
I think it's more fluid than that myself. I guess it maybe reflects the size of the organization you work in and the scale of that organization. Tina may have a different perspective on that. But my kind of recollection and thinking is that the first job, if you feel it's in the right place and you've got a good story to tell, it doesn't really matter necessarily what that first job is. Don't be too impatient about trying to land the perfect job that you think is going to match your skills exactly, because that will come. You get that job, then you start moving on and pushing in that direction with those skills. And some places will have kind of a ground floor level, other places will be far more fluid. I think workplaces are far flatter than they used to be and more fluid. People move around within them much more and within their careers. So these days, I think, people won't be surprised if you switch career 2 or 3 times into different areas. I've done it. I guess I got lucky in my generation, but people won't be surprised by that. So take advantage of that fluidity and find your way around it. Is my thinking.
My advice would be also to research and identify the companies in the sector you're interested in, because often you'll find jobs posted directly on the company websites, and many have them, whether they're smaller or bigger companies. Of course, bigger companies will also have the graduate schemes that we've mentioned. But I think if you look at the companies and see at the type of roles they have, it also will show you in the job descriptions what they're looking for. So it can give you an idea of perhaps the areas you want to develop your skills. There are definitely plenty of opportunities to also apply directly to sort of an entry-level job, as we call it. I certainly hire people at entry level, not just through the graduate scheme, and that gets put out, through the company's own job listings websites, through some recruitment agents as well. So again, you could look into the industry and what kind of agencies are out there specializing in recruitment for these fields, and they can give you advice as well. And I mean, they have accompanied me throughout my entire journey, you know, from starting out very young to the more senior roles I'm looking at now. So do your research. LinkedIn as well, which William mentioned, I think is really good. I mean, we're all on LinkedIn as well.
Yep.
So, you know, connect with people, don't be shy, look at with whom they are connected. So it gives you, again, an idea of people and the companies they're working for. And then on LinkedIn itself, you can find out more about the companies. So I think it boils down to doing research, and don't be shy and reach out to people. I think we all like giving back to the community. We all have been given, you know, opportunities by others, having been pointed in the right direction. It certainly happened for me. So don't be shy. You know, we're here to help, and you are the next generation. And most of the time, I'm looking for people. So, you know, it's important to have good candidates.
Richard, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I just think it's worth. I agree with everything there that from Tina and Will. I think it's also worth remembering that you've got a number of learned societies that offer very, very low cost student membership. And that networking side is very useful, and the resources they provide as well for training for you, where you can access online training materials. I'm thinking particularly of the Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Society, or RSPSOC. I'm thinking of the Geological Remote Sensing Group, and of course the RGS. And at the RGS, you get quite a few online training materials, and you get occasional training courses. For instance, you get, I think you're still doing it, the Explore Weekend. And at that, you get to an awful lot of potential skill sets. You see something of them and introductions to them, and you meet a lot of people. But there's a whole load of resources there that you could tap into as students, which you can access at very, very low cost. If not free, then they'll be very, very low cost.
Thank you, Richard, and we'll be compiling and circulating some of those. There's also the Chartered Institute of Insurers, which has a free student membership, which is a great resource. So we'll make sure that we send those afterwards. There've been a couple of questions around diversity, and if there are any particular programs or initiatives that you're aware of for students, maybe from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds or from other backgrounds with protected characteristics. Is there anything you can think of immediately to sort of point to, or again, is that resources we can draw together afterwards? Tina?
Yeah, I mean, resources, I don't know, I have to have a think about it, but I just wanted to comment that this whole topic of inclusion and diversity is actually quite prominent in the financial sector, insurance sector, especially perhaps recognizing that it's been also quite male dominated historically. But you know, we're now finding ourselves more and more with the next generation, especially from a graduate level. The people that are coming in entry level is so balanced these days. You know, whether female, male, different backgrounds, is really is stressed in our industry to make a real difference, and that's something I've really enjoyed and am passionate about. I even sit on a sort of support and ID panel board in terms of supporting equal parental leave, for instance. You know, when you start a family later on in your life, you know, it's all about these equal opportunities and making sure everybody is treated fairly across you know, gender, ethnic backgrounds. So I think right now the industry is actually most acute and aware of making a difference there. So definitely a good time.
Great, thank you. Good. I realise we're sort of coming towards the end of the time we've got available for this particular session, and I know how busy everybody is. I'll make a couple of comments to wrap up at the end, but I just wanted to turn back to the three of you and to see if there were comments you were hoping to make that you haven't had the chance to make, or if there was some advice that you wanted to give to a younger self. You know, if you were starting out again, some words of wisdom that you might want to share at this stage. But any final words that you'd like to share with the attendees, recognizing we're going to collect some resources and things afterwards. Maybe we'll go and I'm going to put Richard on the spot on this one first.
Okay, yeah, sure. I was just thinking there about opportunities as well. And a few years ago, we looked at something called digital data poverty, and the fact that a lot of the data that we could use for assessing risks and risk management, you often had to pay quite a lot of money to get hold of the data, or you had to pay a lot of money for the software. A lot of that data is now freely available, whether it's satellite data or other data sets that you can access over the internet, and the software is freely available. The only real limitation at the moment is probably your access to the internet and be able to get internet freely and able to transfer data around. But things have really improved from where they were just a few years ago. So in terms of getting the data and the data analysis, that geospatial data analysis, and putting it to good use, we are really living in a bit of a golden age at the moment. So the opportunities have got better from where they were. Before, there was a bit of a cost barrier. You had to have a bit more money to get on and do a lot of this sort of work, whether you're a company or whether you're an individual. So things have got better.
An optimistic outlook. Thank you, Richard. William.
Yeah, I guess really my advice would be understand the industry, demonstrate that you're invested in it through doing research and demonstrating that knowledge, and get involved. So whether that's with societies or, you know, we've got the disaster risk management professional practice group with the RGS. So, you know, there are things like that Tina, we've all three been very instrumental in setting up. And then the other thing, just final thing really, is just recognise that geography is a very, very valuable skill set to have, whichever side of the kind of the geographic coin you come from. You know, it's a great way of thinking. It's, you know, it adds a lot, and just to value that and realise that you are going to be adding value with that to the job that you go into.
Thank you. And Tina.
Yeah, perhaps just 2 points from me. I think with this industry in particular, risk management as a whole, there is so much room for different skills, different specializations. So don't worry, I saw a couple of questions about, you know, oh, do I need to be technical? Do I need to be just GIS focused? That is not the case. You can be if you want to. We do have GIS teams specifically, but if not, that's fine too. That you know, they're different areas, you know, from not just the model development to evaluating the models, the science and research side, but also running the models, evaluating the exposures, producing reports, you know, quantifying the risk. It's just huge. From a business point of view, that there would be something for everybody, I would say. So don't worry about that. The last point, perhaps as a piece of advice, which I don't think I ever made use of before, is looking for a mentor. I mean, I don't know, at sort of academic level, undergraduate, it wasn't something that sort of was a concept mentioned to me at that time. It sort of came more when I started my career at certain companies where, you know, there was an offer for colleagues to mentor each other, you know, to support on the progression side of things. So I would really encourage that. Whether now looking for people, you know, networking and seeking advice versus maybe once you land a job, obviously find your feet. But it's really valuable having someone who you can call your mentor, who you can use as a sounding board, who can give you some advice. So don't be shy, you know, ask for these things.
Thank you. Thank you to the three of you for your time, your expertise, and the really insightful comments, and also your encouragement. I think it's been a really positive discussion. And I also want to thank everyone who's been attending too. As I've mentioned on a couple of occasions, we're going to send a follow-up email. We'll have some links to those resources. We're going to continue to build that resource bank. So we'll be pointing to some of the organizations, we'll be pointing to some of the companies, we'll be pointing to some of the opportunities, and we'll be pointing to the professional practice group that's been mentioned a couple of times at the RGS as a way to get to know who's active and what's going on within the sector. We're also going to ask you for a little bit of feedback. This is our first event, so we want to learn, we want to improve, we want to make these as useful as possible. But again, thank you for taking the time to join us. Good luck. We're going to have more sessions. They're going to focus on different sectors, different elements, and also some more generic sessions too about things like CVs, applications, and all of those sorts of things. So thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon, everybody. Goodbye.